Hi, I'm Garm1, and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Todd Crapper. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. So you're here today to talk about vision layers. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So Vision Layers, and I want to make sure I get the full name. Vision Layers Creating Accessible Updates for Tabletop RPGs is basically a project where I reached out to a few notable indie RPG publishers like Pelgrane Press, Nerdburger Games, Third Eye Games, several others who I can't announce just yet. But basically, kind of reached out and said, I've been working on this technique that I've been applying, and I want to use it to start making existing PDF copies of games much more accessible. Got a lot of great reaction, and so basically, we're crowdfunding to try and raise money to basically be able to pay me to update these existing games to make them, a little bit more usable for people with vision-based disabilities.
Right, absolutely, and that's incredibly important because a lot of people in this space have some kind of vision issues, and a lot of books are not the most readable.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where, and everyone thinks that, well, I've made sure that I've exported the file and that it's a tagged file. But even then, at the same time, too, so many, because RPGs are such a visual medium with artwork and everything, even so many PDFs, when you first turn on a screen reader, it never gives you the name of the book because the name is almost always a graphic. So when someone is trying to use a screen reader, the very first thing that they hear is maybe the publisher name or the author, but it just doesn't, it's not quite 100% there. And then in some other cases, it's almost like 0%. But even then, too, the reason why it's called Vision Layers is because the main update that these PDFs are going to get is I have a technique that I call Vision Layers. And the idea is that they're actual layers that are added to the PDF that allow you to create options for how you want to be able to read the PDF. So if you have trouble with the initial font that it came with, there's going to be one or possibly even two different font options involved. If you have some issue with the color, or even if personally find it too distracting, or just want to turn it off because you want to print some stuff at home, there will be a way to turn off the color or even turn off the images altogether. It's all going to be based on the individual needs of how the individual files are set up and what kind of things we can do to expand it outward. So it's about creating your own personal option for viewing the PDF.
Right, absolutely, and it's worth noting now that you mentioned even if you just find the colors a little bit distracting, this is very useful for people who don't have particular visual disabilities. It makes things a lot easier to read for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things, like over time, your eyes start to go. Some things are just, a little hard. Even too, just the idea of white text on a dark or a black box is something that can be, troubling for people who, don't think that they have any kind of vision issues. So this is just a way to, kind of, but at the same time too, keep some of the initial, kind of color and flair that comes with a lot of these projects. But just kind of keeping it in mind that this is not the kind of thing that everybody is able to make use of.
Right. So, what brought about this particular project?
Well, this was actually that vision layers is something that I've been working on for my own stuff. I run a small company called Broken Ruler Games. And when I initially started doing it was for a game of mine called High Plains Samurai. And the main reason is because a good friend of mine, Eric Paquette, big time shout out, um, it was basically, there was a lot of red. I like to put like blood splatter in the book because the game was a lot about violence. And right away, he got back to me and said, he was like, oh, well, some of the titles are, I can't quite read them or anything like that. So, is there any way that maybe I could get a special copy that lets me be able to read the whole thing? And that kind of got me thinking is, because he's colorblind. So basically for him, the color red just doesn't show up. It's either a white or, a complete absence of anything, or he's barely able to make it out. So I started to think that, well, that'd be easy enough. I've already made all the raw pieces myself. It was a simple matter of just exporting alternative versions that were either all black or a grayscale. And then I just included that as a layer underneath everything. And then from there, I ended up working with another friend of mine, Jacob Wood, who runs a company called Accessible Games. And he is obviously, by the nature of his company, very big on making things as accessible as possible for his fans. He and I have been working on a few things together. One thing has kind of led to another, and this was something that we experimented with. And I just kind of had the idea. I had met with a client who was interested in doing some accessibility options for an existing game of yours. And I just kind of drove home after that meeting with the client and thought, I wonder if there are others out there who have even considered it, but just aren't sure if they want to put the cost in. Because there is money. You have to pay somebody to do this kind of thing. So I just reached out to see if anyone was interested in doing something like this. But then within 5 minutes, I thought, wait a second, what if the publisher didn't have to pay for it? What if the people who wanted these things basically paid for the work to be done in advance? And that's how it all came together as a Kickstarter. And then from there, it did not take long. Pelgrane Press, gotta love them. They were the first ones on board. Kat Tobin saw the post through Kevin Culp, who's a friend of mine, and one thing led to another. And then as soon as Pelgrane was on board, there was just like 15 others responded almost immediately. So the reaction to it was great, and within the space of like 3 weeks, here we are. We got the Kickstarter running, and it's already 300% funded.
Nice, and I'm very glad it. I'm very glad to see names that we've interviewed here before on this. Uh, Capers, we actually did an interview for during its initial Kickstarter, so it's nice to see. Nice to see them. Um, and yeah, it does cost a ton of money to do a lot of things, especially if you're going in afterwards and making it happen. Um, a lot of people don't
Yeah,
realize that.
yeah, it is one of those things that it takes a fair bit of work to organize and get everything on track. So, for example, I was working on layout for something that has vision layers on it, and I had to make some adjustments to the font layers. And then all of a sudden, I noticed there was a typo. And so, because that typo wasn't caught before, I had to go back and then make that same correction into each of the different font based layers and everything. So, it does take some work ahead of time, some planning out. But it's one of the other things that we're going to do with this Kickstarter. And because we reached our goal, this is definitely going to happen. We're going to make a Vision Layers website. And it's basically going to be a how to guide for setting these kinds of things up yourself. As long as your layout software is able to use layers, I'm going to show you some, tips and tricks that, I've used over the past 2 years or so of developing this practice. So the idea is to not just expand these particular games, but the idea is to start making this more and more available so that, there's less reasons for these kinds of things not to happen.
I'm really glad to hear that. Having a resource like that is going to be invaluable, especially for indie developers.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. There's with everything going on, 2020 being the year that it is, a lot of businesses have had to find new or more interesting ways to kind of reach out to their clients, and their fan base. And this just kind of seemed like if we in the indie RPG market could kind of get a good handle on this and show its viability, it's not going to take long for others to come along and say, well, if that's all it takes, then yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I mean, basically, with the Kickstarter, it's for every $750 Canadian that gets raised, is basically another book being added to the queue. And that is mostly my average cost per book. Some are going to take more, some are going to take less. That's basically the equivalent of about $550 to $600 American. And so even just sharing that information, I'm hoping it's going to show some publishers. It's like if you could tack on an extra $500 onto your budget, this kind of thing is possible, and it can be done after the fact that you want to. It's much easier when it's done right from the get go. But that's what I'm hoping to is to kind of, help bring awareness to the fact that, these kind of options, all you need to know is that it's available and how to do it. And then basically kind of like the world's your oyster.
Absolutely. And how would publishers go about reaching out to you for these kinds of services?
Well, they can always reach out to me. I have a freelance website that I use, which is toddcrapper.wordpress.com. There's also I'm also accessible through Twitter, which is at warden_op. Or I'm also on Facebook as Todd Crapper. There's no duplicates. If you see a Todd Crapper, it is me. There's not too many people who are using my name. So yeah, and it's one of those things, like, even if there's just questions, how would I go about doing this? I have a thing that I've been doing for the publishers involved with this project that I call an accessibility review, where I just look over the PDF to make recommendations. That's the kind of thing I'd have no problem to provide. Anything that's going to, help to, bring more accessibility to the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, this is an excellent project. Accessibility is a recurring theme on this show. I try to bring it up whenever I can. Um,
Nice.
yeah, I and then I don't subtitle my videos because they're long and I have a lot of them. But you know,
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, it's bit by bit, things are getting easier. Like, even to getting ready for this Kickstarter, I knew Kickstarter wasn't necessarily an accessible format, but clearly over the course of the last few months, they have been using time to work on a few upgrades. And so, it is something where it's, getting there bit by bit, more and more. I think also, too, because so many people have been working from home and using a lot of the same resources that various people with disabilities were really pushing for and now starting to become more mainstream. I think these kind of things, even the whole idea of completely relying off of a digital copy of a tabletop RPG is, I'm sure that quantity wise, way more PDFs are out there than any kind of physical copy. So the barriers have started to be kind of whittled away bit by bit. This time next year, the whole idea of having captions to video could just be an automatic thing. Click the button, or even just uploading the video, and YouTube could take care of it, completely automated. So it's getting there and it's getting better, but it takes a push from users, from consumers like you and me and everyone else watching this, to just kind of say, yes, I very much want to see that. One of the great things with this Kickstarter has been, I'd almost say at least half the people who have pledged to it don't actually want any of this for themselves. They just want to see it made. I had someone gave $1,000 to the project and basically said, "No, I'm good. Thank you very much." And that was it. $1,000 just to make sure that this is something that would be available for others. And that's what it takes. You ask, you poke, you prod, and things do start to happen.
you love to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but here's hoping, if this is one way that's going to help move it a little bit forward, that would be great. I mean, in the meantime, at the very least, this is an opportunity to update these particular titles. Like I said, I've got about 15 on the queue at the minute, and if the Kickstarter goes really well, I'd be more than happy to reach out and start trying to find some more.
Excellent. Um, yeah. Anything else you'd like to bring up while you're here?
No, basically, other than that, the Vision Layers Kickstarter is running until the morning of December 12th. So if it's December 11th and you're listening to this, it's time to panic and get on Kickstarter and do a search for Vision Layers.
And you don't even have to search that hard because it should be right below this. Um,
And that too.
yeah. Uh, well, Todd, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me and helping to spread the word.
It's a pleasure, honestly. And for everybody watching at home, thank you very much and have a good night.